What happens to a soul that remembers heaven but awakens in chains? There is an ache that echoes louder than any cry, a silence deeper than the grave, and it begins not on earth but in the heavens before earth ever knew sorrow. They say the stars do not speak anymore, but there was a time when they wept, when even the thrones of heaven trembled beneath the weight of choice. In that age, before language, before memory, before the first prophet saw light pierce the veil of night, there were watchers, sentinels of the skies, holy and radiant not as gods but as those entrusted by the divine. But what if the entrusted fell in love with that which they were meant only to protect? What if their eyes, once lifted in eternal praise, were drawn down not by malice but by wonder, by beauty, by the echo of something in mankind they had never felt before: need, hunger, longing, vulnerability? The heavens do not speak of them now. The holy scrolls were torn, and yet, beneath the deserts, buried in dust and sealed in forgotten caves, fragments remain. Fragments of a book, a tale, a warning. The Book of Giants. This is not a tale of monsters. It is a tale of angels, of rebellion, of mercy denied, of children never meant to be born, and of a grief too great for the stars to bear. Come closer now. Let your breath slow. For what I am about to share has not been heard in fullness since the stones were soft and the sky remembered the names of the fallen. The oil lamp flickers, the scroll is unrolled, and the silence begins to speak. There was a stillness in the beginning, not emptiness but fullness concealed, the kind of silence that breathes, watches, waits, a silence that lived in the breath before creation, the hush of heaven before the command, be. Before stars knew their names, before earth spun in reverence around its flame, there were those who watched, not men, not beasts, but watchers, angels appointed to gaze upon the works of the Most High. They did not labor, they did not hunger, they did not ask, they simply beheld, and it was enough. Their wings were not symbols of flight but of purpose. Their voices were not loud, they sang in stillness, in chorus with the turning of the firmament. Above all thrones, above the great rivers of time, they stood like lanterns in the eternal dusk. And when the Eternal One shaped man from clay, they stood in awe. He was so fragile, so temporary, dust and yet beloved. It confused them, these sons of the high places. To them eternity had no beginning, no end. But mankind was a whisper, a breath rising and falling, made of soil and yearning. Why would the divine descend so low? Why would he breathe his spirit into a creature destined to die? The heavens offered no answers, only the pulse of holy will rippling through realms. And so the watchers watched. They watched Adam awaken. They watched Eve bloom beside him like a flower never imagined. They watched as mankind stumbled through innocence, barefoot in paradise, clothed only in light and unknowing. They watched until they forgot how not to feel. It began slowly. A trembling in the unseen, a pause in the song, and then a glance. One of the watchers, Samyaza, the leader among them, lingered longer. He watched with more than duty. There was something in him that stirred when the women of earth wept beside rivers. He saw beauty in their brokenness, in their pleading eyes, in the way their hands shaped bread with trembling devotion. It was not lust, not at first, it was wonderful. It was the ache of eternity brushing against the warmth of the temporary. What they had in heaven was holy, but what the humans had was messy, soft, unfinished, real. And for the first time since his creation, Samyaza desired. He was not alone. Others felt it, a flicker in the core of their radiant being. Not rebellion, not yet, just a yearning too deep to name. The heavens were quiet, but the quiet grew heavy. They began to meet in hidden places, no longer singing, no longer still. Whispers passed between them like coals in the dark. Do you feel it too? Yes. Do you dream of them every night? It was there in the shadow of Mount Hermon that the watchers made their pact, 200 in all, Samyaza among them, their voices quivering like stars about to fall. We swear, he said, voice low like thunder buried in sand, that we will descend together so none may bear the guilt alone. Their oath was binding, not in defiance of God but in devotion to one another. But heaven knew, of course heaven knew, and yet the silence remained, not approval, not denial, only the sacred quiet that comes before a storm. And so they fell, not cast down, but stepping willingly from light into dusk. When their feet touched earth, the sky turned its face, and the silence, once holy, became haunting. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next hidden scroll may find you. There is a moment in every descent where the fall becomes a choice. And when the watchers stepped onto the sacred soil of earth, they did not fall like stones hurled from judgment. They came down like prayers lost in the wind, too heavy to rise, too human to stay. The first thing they noticed was the air. It was thick. It trembled with scent and sorrow, dust and dew. Their celestial lungs drank it in like a forbidden nectar. The second was time. Not the time of heaven, fluid, eternal, without edge, but time that bleeds. Time that cuts the living into memories, into aging skin and breaking hearts. It struck them like a curse, and yet it thrilled them. They could feel it, and feeling in its first breath felt holy. Samyaza stood among olive trees the first night. He looked up at a sky he once knew from above, now foreign, distant. The stars no longer sang to him. He was a watcher no more. He was something else. Something is coming. The humans called them gods. They bowed in fear, in awe, but the angels recoiled. They did not want worship. They wanted to touch, to hold, to know. They took wives. Each of the 200 found a woman, not with violence, not with force, but with a sacred hunger, clothed in awe and fire. The women called them Nephilim, fallen giants, the mighty ones. But the truth was softer than myth. They loved it. They grieved. They held the faces of their children and did not know what to name the ache that rose within. But heaven did. For the children of these unions, these half-breath, half-light beings were not meant to be. They grew too fast, larger than life, wiser than men, but wilder than angels. They were beautiful, radiant, and terrifying, but their hunger knew no rest. They were taught the secrets of heaven by their fathers, secrets not meant to be born in flesh. How to bind, how to shape, how to pierce the heavens with stone and steel. Azazel, one of the watchers, gave them iron and with it war. He taught the women how to paint their faces, to enchant and allure. He shaped the world not as it was intended, but as a mirror of his own longing. And the children, the giants, fed not only on grain, but on men. Their appetites grew with their shadow. They drank the rivers, they tore the trees, and the earth cried out. Blood soaked the fields. The prayers of the dying rose not to the stars, but to the space between them, to the silence that once watched, now burning. God did not answer, not yet, but in the heavens angels wept. The very ones who never understood why the clay-born were loved now watched as their own brothers. Children turned paradise into ruin. Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, was taken aside, not by force, but by mercy. The Most High whispered to him in dreams, "Write what you see." Let the generations know why the stars wept and the stones remembered fire. Enoch wandered the desolate places. He saw the giants tall as towers, eyes aflame with inherited sorrow. He saw women bowed in grief, mothers of monsters, and he wrote. He did not curse. He remembered. For the watchers, the days blurred. They saw their children slaughtered by their own madness. They saw mankind, once beautiful and fragile, rise in fear and vengeance. The skies turned gray. Heaven still had not spoken. But the silence had changed. It was no longer soft. It was sharp, like a blade held just above the neck. And then it broke. A voice like wind through a shattering temple, a call that rang through every bone of earth. It was not anger, it was sorrowful, and it spoke not to men, but to the watchers. What have you done with what was holy? They had no answer. Their wings had withered. Their songs turned to dust. Their love, which once felt like light, now lay tangled in blood and ruin. Samyaza fell to his knees atop the mountain where the pact was first sworn. And for the first time he understood. He had not fallen from grace, he had wandered away from it. Not by hatred, but by forgetting. And what is forgetting if not the first form of rebellion? We move now to the end of the first turning, where the silence breaks and the sorrow becomes sacred memory. The mountain where Samyaza once made his vow was no longer clothed in mist. It stood naked before the heavens, scorched by regret. Each stone whispered of choices etched not in time, but in eternity. The pact that once united 200 angels now lay in shards, not broken by violence, but by the weight of knowing. Knowing that love, when untethered from obedience, becomes a flame that does not warm, only burns. One by one, the watchers return to the mount. Some crawling, some are silent. Others carried the bones of their own children, too heavy to bury, too sacred to leave behind. They did not speak. What could be said? The skies were no longer silent. The clouds gathered like mourning cloth, and then from the east light, not soft, not golden, but pure cold fire. It did not descend, it arrived. 7 angels, messengers of judgment. Eyes like morning before dawn, faces veiled in divine sorrow. They spoke not as men do, but as winds that have never known rest. Their words were not shouted, they simply were. You were made to watch, not touch. The sentence was passed not in rage, but in the full, unrelenting gaze of truth. You shall see no more light, your names shall be sealed, your voices silenced, you will not rise again. The earth opened, not violently, it yielded like a mother forced to swallow her own child. The watchers were bound not with rope but with memory. Chains of remembrance forged from every face they had loved, every secret they had shared, every time they called beauty holy when it was only desire. They were taken beneath the mountains, imprisoned in darkness deeper than death. There they wait still, not sleeping, not dreaming, only remembering. The Nephilim, their children, were hunted next, not by heaven but by the earth itself. Storms rose, the seas swelled. The sky wept until it could no longer weep. It was not wrath, it was cleansing, a flood. But that is not this story, not yet. We remain with the buried, with the watchers beneath the stone. There in that tomb of silence, Samyaza still whispers, not aloud, within. For what is exile if not the echo of what you once knew and can never touch again? They say he begged. They say he sent Enoch a message, a scroll of trembling ink and sacred grief. Petition for us, it read. Bring our cry before the face. But the heavens had closed. The prayer rose and returned unanswered. Even Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, wept as he wrote. It is finished, he whispered to the wind, and the wind carried it to the edge of the firmament. A final word, a holy silence. And in the deep the giants faded, their bones ground into mountains, their names erased from tongues. Only fragments remain, stone scrolls, buried texts, echoes of a song too sacred to sing. The Book of Giants, not a tale of victory, not even a tale of loss, a remembering of angels who loved too deeply, of love that forgot obedience, of beauty that became ruin. And still the question lingers, would you fall for love? Would you risk heaven to feel the warmth of a hand in yours? Would you kneel on sacred ground and break the silence? Because they did. And now we live among their shadows. Their stories remain not in books, but in the hush between storms, in dreams that smell of stone and fire, in the ache we cannot name when we look at the stars too long. The silence before the fall never truly ended. It just waits for the next name to be whispered, for the next soul to listen. We begin now a darker walk, one not beneath the stars, but near the throne itself, where even angels dare not weep too loudly. What remains near the throne when holiness burns too bright for even the pure to bear? There is no shadow in that place, no corner untouched by light. And yet there are ashes. They do not speak, they do not stir, but they remain proof that even near the face of the eternal, something once stood and fell. They were not watchers. They were closer, not guardians but attendants, the inner ring, the burning ones, the angels who never looked away, whose gaze was fixed only on the light, who sang not from distance but from within the fire itself. Among them a name once shone brighter than most, Shemihaza, second only to Samyaza in power but greater still in longing. He was not of the outer realm like the other watchers. He stood closer, and because he stood closer, he knew more. He saw not just the command to serve, but the heart behind it. He was there when the decree was given, let us make man. He felt the tremble in the air when the first clay-born drew breath. He did not speak. He bowed, but something in him did not rest. He wondered, why shape what will die? Why breathe into a creature whose hands are stained with time? He watched as the man was loved while angels only served. And though no envy crossed his lips, its smoke found a place behind his eyes. He remained near the throne. He continued to sing, but his heart tilted not in rebellion but at aches. He was not cast out. He stepped back, just one ring outward, then another, until one day he stood beside the watchers. They called him brother, but he was still clothed in fire. And when Samyaza spoke of the beauty of women, Shemiheza said nothing, not yes, not no, only silence, but in his silence was consent. He knew the cost, and he came anyway, for Shemiheza did not fall from heaven. He carried heaven with him and chose to give it away, not in arrogance, but in grief. That is the holiest tragedy, not the rebel who curses the light, but the angel who misses it, who aches for something more even when everything is already his. When Shemiheza touched earth, the soil burned beneath his feet, the trees bowed, the stars hid their faces, for they knew something sacred had been misplaced. He taught men enchantments, not spells of control, but words of power. He gave them names that echoed like thunder behind curtains of breath. He unrolled scrolls of light and poured them into mortal minds, and they used them to rule, to summon, to bend the sky into desire. He did not teach them evil, he only gave them what they were not meant to carry. The stars, once pierced with prayer, now trembled with commands, and Shemiheza watched it all, not with joy but with silence. He took no wife, he fathered no children, his sin was not lust. It was this, he knew better and came anyway. He stood beside the watchers as the judgment came. He did not weep, but his fire went out. It did not vanish, it turned to ash. And those ashes remain near the throne. They are not swept away. They are not spoken of. But every angel who passes that place lowers their wings, for the ashes remember what holiness can become when love forgets its place. They say the Eternal One did not curse Shemiheza. He only turned his face. And for a being who lived in that light, that was enough, more than enough. For the highest sorrow is not wrath, it is absent. We now descend into the heart of the wound, where remembrance stings sharper than judgment and silence becomes a sentence. What does it mean to carry heaven in your bones and know it will never return? Shemiheza did not resist when the decree came. He did not plead as Samyaza did. He did not send messages to Enoch. He stood in the rain of judgment and did not flinch. He was not afraid of punishment. He had already lost the only thing he feared to lose, the presence. The others were cast into darkness, but Shemiheza, he was not taken, he was buried in stillness. They say he sat upon a mountain, not to flee, not to rise again, but to sit, to wait. He built no city, he sang no curse. He simply sat and watched the sky he once called home. And when his name was called no more, he whispered it to himself, once, then never again. The other watchers cried out in madness beneath the earth. Their children raged across the valleys, but Shemiheza sat alone, unmoving, as if waiting for the end to arrive and find him already surrendered. The people below began to speak of him. They saw his silhouette unmoving for days, then weeks, then years. They left offerings, not out of worship, but I wonder, who is this flame that does not flicker? Who is this statue that weeps without tears? And always, always the answer returned in the wind. He was once an angel. Children feared his shadow. Mothers prayed it would pass by their door. For though he did no harm, he carried a grief too large to name. The air around him bent. Birds did not fly near. Even the rain avoided his shoulders. But lightning visited often, as if the sky itself remembered him. Some say he spoke to it. Others say he listened. But no one dared climb the mountain, except one. A boy no older than 10, barefoot and thin as a reed. He had lost his family in the wars of the giants. His village turned to ash. He had nothing left, only a name and a prayer never answered. And so he climbed, not to find hope, but to give it away. If the gods will not hear, he whispered, then let me die near one who once heard them. He found Shemiheza sitting among the stones, eyes closed, breathing slow, steady like the rhythm of ancient songs. The boy sat beside him, did not speak, did not weep. He simply sat for 3 days, and on the third, Shemiheza opened his eyes. There were no flames left in them, only ash, but within the ash a spark. He looked at the boy, not as a god, not as a judge, but as one who once knew the taste of light. "You should not be here," Shemiheza said, his voice dry, broken, beautiful. "I have nowhere else to be," the boy replied. Silence. Then the wind shifted, not loud, just enough to carry a memory. Shemiheza reached out, his hand heavy, ancient, wrapped in grief. He placed it on the boy's head, and the sky shuddered, not in wrath, but in remembering, for in that moment heaven saw him. The presence turned ever so slightly, not to restore, not to lift the curse, but to witness. And sometimes that is enough. The boy returned to his people. He carried no prophecy, no fire, only peace. A quietness that could not be shaken. He became a man, a teacher, a scribe. He wrote stories by oil light, stories of angels and the fall, stories of sorrow that still remembered love. And always when asked how he knew, he would answer, "I once sat beside a forgotten name, and in the silence it remembered itself." Shemiheza remains on that mountain, they say, still, breathing, waiting. He does not ask for forgiveness. He does not seek return. He only holds memory, for the heavens have forgotten what he cannot. And that is why the ashes remain near the throne, not to shame, not to condemn, but to remind that even the purest flame can dim. Even the closest angel can wander, and even silence I can sing again. We now enter the last breath where the fire is gone, but its warmth lingers in the dust. The mountain that cradled Shemiheza grew old, its stones cracked, its roots drank storms and silence alike, and yet the figure remained. Centuries passed like wind, brushing the edge of his cloak, never moving it. Empires rose below, languages were born and died, scrolls were inked, names were buried, but Shemiheza stayed. Not as punishment, not as a monument, he became memory embodied. A flame turned into dust, still holding its shape. He watched as men forgot the watchers. They forgot the giants, the angels, the pact beneath Hermon. They forgot the grief. Only legends remained, scattered, broken, fragmented across the sands. In Babylon, he was called a spirit of the hills. In Persia, a fallen light. In hidden scrolls buried beneath desert stone, he was remembered as the ash that did not scatter. He did not answer any of them, for names mean little to those who have been seen by the face and then turned away. But heaven, even in its silence, remembers. The throne, wrapped in holy fire, still holds a trace of him. When the seraphim pass by, they do not look, not out of shame but reverence. For Shemiheza was not cast from heaven. He walked away, and walking left a trail of ash too sacred to sweep aside. The Eternal One, he who sees all, speaks when he chooses. And though no words have come for Shemiheza since the fall, some say the silence itself was a mercy. For wrath speaks sharply, but sorrow mourns in quiet. The boy who once climbed the mountain grew old. On his deathbed he called for his children. He held out a scroll wrapped in faded cloth. "Read it," he said, "but not with your eyes." They unwrapped it and found no words, only dust, gray, soft, cold. And beneath it a single line etched in a language no man remembered. The ashes near the throne still breathe. They did not understand, not then, but in dreams they began to see the mountain. They saw the figure still seated, eyes closed, but no longer alone. Others had come, not angels, not giants, but those who carried sorrow like a song, those whose hearts had broken open, not shut, those who knew the holiness of regret. He did not speak to them, he did not need to. For in his stillness they remembered something the world had taught them to forget, that some sins are not answered with thunder. Some wounds are not sealed. Some flames, once divine, must go dark so that another may light a new fire from their ashes. And so near the throne, beyond judgment, beyond exile, there remains a place. Not for the righteous, not for the proud, but for those who cannot forget. There Shemiheza still kneels, not asking, not hopping, just remembering. The throne does not burn him, it simply watches. And in that watching there is something, not forgiveness, not yet, but a breath, a pause, a softening, like the last ember. Before dawn, we now enter the paradox where the unnatural children of heaven and earth dare to wonder if they too might be remembered by the one who never forgets. They were not meant to dream. They were not meant to feel anything at all, not sorrow, not joy, not awe. They were born of a union not blessed, a breath stolen from the heavens and bound to clay. The Nephilim. Their name means the fallen ones, but they did not fall. They were born into it, born into exile. Born into a silence they never chose. Born from desire wrapped in radiance into a world already bruised by their very breath. They were giants, yes, in form, in strength, in wisdom, but inside, they were children, half light, half dust, too much of both, too little of either. They walked the valleys of early earth like shadows with bones, watched by stars that once sang to their fathers. Their hunger was not just for food, it was for belonging. And when they slept, if sleep ever truly found them, they dreamed. Not of war, not of conquest, but of a place they had never seen, a light they had never touched, a name they had never been taught, yet somehow always knew. Some called it madness, others called it echo, but it was real, a low thrum in their bones, a warmth in their chests when the wind carried the scent of rain. They dreamed of the throne, of fire without pain, of wings without weight, of a song so ancient it felt like a lullaby remembered from before their breath. One among them, named Maui, dreamed more often than the others. He was taller than the cedars, eyes like storm-soaked skis. And yet he was gentle, curious, silent in crowds, louder in prayer. Yes, he prayed, not to his father, a fallen angel wrapped in sorrow, not to the stars. He prayed upward to the place above silence, to the one he had never met. Every night he would kneel, this towering beast, feared by men, avoided by angels, and whisper, "Do you see me?" He did not expect an answer. But the question became a fire he could not extinguish. He asked the other giants, "Do you ever feel as though you were made for something else?" They laughed or turned away or broke another tree in anger, but one listened. Ahia, a warrior, fierce and torn, he was killed, he had conquered, but inside he too remembered the silence. He came to Mawa one night and said, "I dreamed of a voice. It did not speak, but it filled the sky." Maui nodded. "I think he speaks without sound." The giants began to gather in secret, not to wage war, but to wonder, to remember dreams. They sat beneath the stars, not as gods, not as monsters, but as sons. They began to ask, were we cursed, or were we simply born into the curse of others? No answer came, only wind, only moonlight, only the ache, but Maui believed. And belief in one not meant to believe had become something holy. He began to write, not in human tongue, not in angelic tongue, but in something new. A blend of clay and flame, a language that mourned even as it hoped. He etched his words into the side of a mountain, lines that bled with longing. They say heaven forgets us, but I remember heaven and I was never there. The mountain wept. Water poured from its cracks for 3 days. The humans below called it a curse. The angels above called it rebellion. But the Eternal One said nothing. And sometimes nothing is louder than thunder. We now step deeper into the mystery where giants weep like prophets and heaven listens in stillness. Mawa walked the earth like a question carved into stone. Wherever he stepped, the ground bent, but his heart bent more. He had seen the ruin left by his kind, fields torn, cities swallowed, skies darkened by smoke that once sang with prayer. He had not done it himself, but he carried it in his breath, in the way people fled from his shadow, in the way even animals refused to meet his gaze. Still he dreamed. One night as the stars turned silently overhead, Maui knelt by a river not to drink but to listen. The water moved like prayer across stone. And in the murmur of its song he heard a whisper, not in words, in memory, a name he had never spoken, Enoch. He did not know what it meant, but it clung to him like mist before dawn, like the last note of a forgotten song. He rose and walked for 7 nights. No sleep, no food, just the name burning in his mind. On the 8th day he found the cave. It was nothing, just stone and silence. But something inside told him the silence here remembered God. He entered, and within a scroll, old, fragile, covered in dust but not destroyed. Maui could not read it, not with his eyes, but his soul burned. He touched the scroll, and he dreamed. He saw visions not of war, not of giants, but of a man clothed in light, walking between heaven and earth, writing as he wept. Enoch, the scribe. The one who was taken not by death, but by the favor of the Most High. Maui awoke with tears streaming down his face, tears he did not know he could still make. The other giants found him there. Ahia, Hahia, Gilgamesh, Anak, names feared across lands, but here they stood in reverence. They read no words, but they felt it. And they trembled. Maui turned to them. "I must go to him," he said. "To who?" Ahia asked. "To the one who still walks between the worlds." The others said it was madness, that no giant had ever been allowed near a prophet, that Enoch would flee or worse call down the fire, but Maui did not flinch. "I do not go to ask for mercy," he said. "I'm going to ask if we've ever seen each other." He carved a tablet from stone, poured into it all his sorrow, all his wonders, all his prayers. Then he set off alone toward the west, toward the land where heaven once touched earth, toward the veil. They say he crossed mountains no man could climb, the rivers parted, that wolves bowed their heads in his presence, but Maui noticed none of it. He was not seeking awe, he was seeking home. He found Enoch on the seventh dawn, a frail figure wrapped in linen standing beside an altar of unlit fire. Maui fell to his knees. His voice cracked not with fear but with reverence. "You are the one," he whispered. Enoch turned slowly. He did not run, he did not tremble. He looked into Maui's eyes and saw not a beast but a child, a soul too large for its body, a sorrow too old for its time, and Enoch wept. He took the tablet. He read the words carved in pain and prayer, then placing a hand upon Maui's brow, he whispered, "You were not forgot." And the sky sighed. A wind rose soft, sacred, the kind that wraps around bones and memory. Maui said nothing more. He stood, he bowed, and returned to his kind. He said only one thing: he saw me. And from that day the dreams of the giants changed. They no longer dreamed of destruction. They no longer dreamed of glory. They dreamed of return, even if the gates were sealed, even if no road remained. Still they dreamed, and in their dreaming heaven listened. We now enter the hush after revelation, when the heart dares to hope, even knowing it may never be answered. The giants, once feared as terrors in the night, began to walk as if their steps remembered holiness. They no longer tore the trees. They no longer drank rivers dry. They sat by fires they did not start. They listened to the silence they once tried to drown. Something was changing, not in heaven, in them. Maui returned each night to the mountain where he found the scroll. He brought no offerings, only silence. He sat, head bowed, like a student before a voice he could no longer hear, but still believed in it. The others began to follow. They gathered beneath the stars, not as kings, but as sons with shattered crowns. One of them, Hahia, Ahia's twin, began carving psalms into stone. They were not like men's psalms. They were raw, unfinished, but they trembled with the truth. Though my hands broke the world, my heart still remembers the sky. Though my shadow blotted out the sun, I still long to be known. Father, though I am not called son, may I be remembered in your silence. The mountains echoed with them. Even the birds began to return, and then the dreams changed again. Maui began to see fire, not of wrath, but of parting, a great flood rising, washing the sins of angels and men alike. He saw giants drowning, their voices rising like smoke, not in terror, in prayer. "Take our breath," they said, "but do not forget our names." He told the others. They grew afraid, not of death, of being erased, of being remembered only as monsters in a story never finished. And so Maui did the only thing he could. He carved every name, onto stone, onto trees, onto caves so deep the light had never reached. Not names of power, names of sorrow. The names the giants whispered to one another when no one was listening. Names like beloved, broken, brother. He even carved the name of the Eternal One, but not in stone, in the silence between his heartbeats. And when the flood came, as he knew it would, he stood tall. He did not flee. He did not rage. He whispered one last time, "I saw you in my dreams. If that was not you, then let me be taken by the lie that loved me. And the water rose. They say the giant's cries shook the heavens, but the heavens wept, not in anger, not in approval, in grief. For in the moment they vanished beneath the tide, the Eternal One did not speak, but he did remember. And that is why, scattered across deserts, beneath sand and time and silence, you will find their prayers, etched in languages long dead. Carved in bones turned to stone, the Book of Giants, not a book of conquest, a book of longing. A testament to the impossible sorrow of being born from two worlds but welcomed in neither. And perhaps that is why they dreamed, because even shadows remember the light. And sometimes those least worthy to return are the ones who most desire the path home. Mawe's name was never erased. Enoch carried it upward, etched in the scrolls he brought before the throne. And when the angels read it, they did not scoff. They bowed their heads. For even giants, when they dream of God, are heard. We now descend not in rebellion but in remembrance into the hollow places where truth was hidden in shadows, waiting for silence to speak again. There are places on the earth that remember what the stars forgot. Caves, not tombs, not dens. Sanctuaries. Hollows carved not by men, not even by time, but by sorrow. When the flood came, the world was washed clean. But not everything was lost. Some truths too sacred for drowning found refuge in stone. And there, beneath layers of silence and sand, the book waited. Not a book of parchment, a book of breath. A memory written in fragments, buried deep inside the caves of Qumran, where even time walks softly. No one knows who hid them. Some say it was the last of the giants, crawling into the dark with tablets strapped to their backs, etching with trembling hands before the water swallowed their world. Others say it was angels, not the fallen, but those who mourned for them, hiding the remnants not in defiance but in mercy. So one day, when the world was quiet again, someone might find them and remember, but the scrolls did not surface for thousands of years. They slept, they waited, their ink faded, their corners curled inward like hands clasped in prayer. And then in 1947, a shepherd boy threw a stone into the mouth of the earth, not seeking truth, just chasing a goat. The stone struck something that did not belong. A jar, old, thin, cracked from the weight of years, inside voices, not in sound, in script. The Book of Enoch, the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Giants, shattered, incomplete but unmistakable. They spoke of angels who descended in brightness and left behind shadows. Of children taller than trees crying out to heaven in dreams, of names that had been silenced now whispering again. The world above did not know what it had found. They called it a myth. Legend, apocrypha, but the stones knew better. The wind that passed through the cave mouth changed. It carried something now, not dust but memory. And those who touched the scrolls, even briefly, reported the same thing, a heaviness, weeping, as if the very paper mourned for what had been lost. Among the fragments was a vision. One name stood out, scorched into the edge of a scroll barely held together by time, Mawa. A vision he received, a warning he sent. He saw the destruction coming. Not just the flood, but forgetting. And so he wrote, so they would not vanish without a trace. The words are broken now, incomplete, but in their brokenness truth bleeds. He wrote of the mountains cracking, of giants falling upon one another in sorrow, not in war, of a voice not human, not divine, calling from above the clouds, you were seen. The cave held that voice. The stone remembered it, and now so do we. Not because of faith, not because of prophecy, because of fragments. Because of silence that refused to stay buried. Because even in ruin, truth leaves fingerprints. The scrolls now sit in glass, dusty, guarded, called Dead Sea texts by scholars who never heard the voices cry. But to those who still listen, really listen, they are not dead, they are breathing. The caves are not empty, they echo with grief, with hope, with stories never meant for daylight. And somewhere beneath the sands, deeper still, more scrolls sleep, waiting for hands gentle enough to open them, waiting for ears quiet enough to hear, and perhaps for hearts willing to believe that even giants wrote psalms, even silence remembers, even stone dreams of God. We move now into the breath between stone and eternity, where what was hidden begins to stir and what was lost dares to speak once more. A cave is a wound in the earth. It bleeds not with blood, but with memory, slow, steady, sacred. The caves of Qumran do not boast. They do not shine. They remain quiet, cool, unmoving. But if you sit long enough, they begin to speak, not with language, with presence. Inside those caves, the air is thicker, time slows, breath becomes prayer without you meaning it to, and in the deepest chambers the scrolls whispered still. What Mawe etched into stone had not vanished. What the Nephilim cried in their last hours did not dissolve in the sea. It was gathered, collected by hands not seen, hands that still served the will, even in the shadow of silence. Not all angels fell. Some remained above, weeping. And in their mourning they descended not to dwell, but to preserve. They did not touch men. They did not linger, but they hid what must not be lost. They wrapped it in linen, placed it in clay, and whispered over it one final blessing, be forgotten until the time of remembering. The scrolls were not meant to survive, but heaven remembered. And when the world grew noisy with war and steel and forgetfulness, he sent a boy chasing a goat into a cave that remembered everything. Mawe's vision was among the fragments. Broken, yes, but broken does not mean gone. What remains is enough. He saw a tablet not of stone but of flame descending from the heavens. It bore names, not just of the Watchers, not just of the Nephilim, names of the righteous, names of the forgotten. Names the earth tried to bury, but the stars refused to forget. In his dream, the flame did not burn, it was purified, and Mawe cried not in fear, but in relief. For even if he could not enter the light, he had seen it, and that was enough. Enough to carve, enough to pray, enough to remember. The scholars who found the scrolls did not understand. They read the words, yes, but they missed the silence. They translated names, debated meanings, argued authorship. But the cave did not care. It had already done its work. The scrolls had been held by wind, washed by time, pressed into stone by the weight of heaven's memory. And that was their purpose, not to explain, to remain. Because sometimes the holiest thing is not what is said, but what is kept safe, kept sacred. Kept in the darkness until someone with clean hands and quiet heart dares to open it. They say more scrolls lie hidden still. In deeper caves, under desert bones, sleeping. Some may never be found, but that's not the tragedy. The tragedy is forgetting they were ever real. For if we forget they were here, if we call them myth, if we erase their ache, then the silence wins. But if we listen even to the fragments, even to the dust, then the story breathes again. And perhaps so do they. The scrolls sleep still, not because they are lifeless, but because we have not yet remembered how to listen. Each fragment, brittle, torn, half swallowed by time, is a psalm of sorrow, a verse of what once was, a tear pressed into parchment. They speak of dreams, not just the giant's dreams of God, but dreams that God may have dreamed for them. What if he too had wept? What if in the secret folds of divine silence he longed for their return, even knowing they could not? The caves carry that ache. They do not shout, they do not weep aloud, they hum. A soft, breathless thrum in the dust, like lullabies from a mother who has already buried too many children. Pilgrims have walked there, historians, thieves, some have taken, some have studied, some have left in fear. But a few, a holy few, have fallen to their knees without knowing why. Not believers, not doubters, just listeners, and in the hush they have heard it. A voice beneath voices, a story still unfolding. The grief is still warm. They have emerged with trembling hands as though they just touched a wound the world had forgotten. One scholar, a woman whose name history will likely erase, once whispered after holding a piece of Mawe's vision, "I don't know what this is, but it feels like someone is loved." That is the truth most fear to name. The Watchers loved it. The giants wept. The fall was not made of fire alone, it was carved in longing. The caves remember this. They are not merely tombs of texts. They are altars. Not to false gods, but to the ache of remembering. A place where heaven's silence bowed low enough to press itself into stone. And as you read, as you breathe, as you let your soul lean into the stillness, perhaps you will hear it too. A child, half angel, half man, dreaming of a sky he never saw, a prophet too old for his time, weeping as he writes, an angel buried in fireless ash, still watching the stars turn above his forgotten name, and the eternal one still silent, but not absent. For the caves that hide the sky also hold the light, not the blinding flame of judgment, but the quiet glow of a story is not yet done. And you, the one listening now in the hush between midnight and morning, you are holding the last page unwritten. So let your heart be still. And if you wake with the ache still in your chest, know this: you've heard the silence, and the silence has heard you. We begin now a scroll of forgetting, not the loss of memory, but its offering, a sacrifice, a burial of self beneath the weight of divine sorrow. What name did he whisper to the wind before silence took it? Not Samiaza, not Shemihaza, not Azazel. His name has been lost, or perhaps gave up, not taken, buried. There was an angel who did not speak during the pact. He stood at the edge of the gathering atop Mount Hermon, watching, listening, but neither agreeing nor fleeing. He did not descend to earth in pride. He did not burn the sky with fire. He stepped downward as one walked into his own grave, not to rule, not to take, but to follow a grief he could not name. He had loved the humans long before his brothers confessed their desire. But his love was different. He did not long for flesh, he longed for nearness. He would watch them pray, stumbling, stuttering, breaking over every sacred word, and wonder why their voice seemed louder in heaven than he ever did. He saw a woman once, her body bent in mourning, her hands covered in dust, her voice cracking as she begged for her child's life. And something in him shattered, not in lust, in recognition. He had never prayed, he had never had to, he had only sung, endlessly, perfectly, but she cried like the world was being born again. And he realized then there was something the clay-born knew that the sky-born never could: desperation, dependence. Faith born not of sight but of silence. He did not desire her body, he desired her ache. He longed to fall to his knees and beg, to be seen, not as an angel, but as a soul. And so when the watchers made their pact, he did not speak, but he followed. He walked behind them as they descended, not touching the earth until the others had long embraced it. When he arrived, he did not take a wife. He did not teach sorcery or war. He wandered from valley to valley, from prayer to prayer. He sat beside tents at night unseen, listening to lullabies, watching fathers pray over sons. He began to whisper blessings under his breath, quiet, trembling invocations to a God who no longer called his name. And yet he hoped. He hoped that even in his exile, his silence might be heard. They say he wrote nothing, that he left no mark. But once in the high deserts of Aram, a child found a stone wrapped in cloth. No writing, no image, just warmth, and a single white feather untouched by time. The stone hummed not with magic but memory. And the child, upon touching it, began to pray, not in her language, not in words, but in tears. She did not know why. She only knew the air around her felt like mourning and mercy. That stone vanished days later, lost again beneath the sand. The feather remained, and the child carried it for the rest of her life, claiming it had come from the hand of a silent angel who had once cried beside her mother's grave. He became a legend, a nameless one, a watcher who did not watch, a rebel who never rebelled. Some said he had buried his name beneath the tree of the first sorrow. Others claimed he gave it to God in silence, and God, out of grief, never gave it back. He was last seen walking into the sea, not drowning, not weeping, just walking, as if returning to the womb of the world where no names were needed and silence was still holy. And somewhere, beneath water and time, his name sleeps, unspoken but not forgotten. The angels above do not speak of him, not because they do not remember, because they cannot bear to. He is not listed among the condemned, nor among the redeemed. He is a space between, a sacred pause, and that pause is his name. We now walk into the sacred hollow where the absence of a name becomes the presence of a prayer and remembrance flows without voice. He was never given a grave, because no one saw him die. No one even saw him leave. It was as if the earth opened in silence and took him gently, not in wrath but in understanding. And yet some say he still walks, not as flesh, not as flame, as wind. A hush in the trees when no breath stirs, a shiver before a prayer is answered. Whisper that carries no sound but moves something deep in the chest. Those who feel it say the same thing though they've never met. I don't know what came over me, but I felt known. He is not a spirit, not a ghost, not holy, not fallen. He is the absence between the stars where only memory dares to dwell. And sometimes memory is more powerful than presence. Enoch knew of him. When he walked the earth, transcribing the visions sent down like lightning wrapped in mercy, he left space in the scrolls. A blank, a gap where a name should be but never was. Scholars call it an error, a gap in the parchment, a torn page, but they do not know that Enoch wrote with tears, and some names can only be written in silence. He wrote this instead: one among them did not curse, one among them did not hunger, one among them buried his name so it would not bring shame to the light. And beside that line no ink, only a faint stain, a ring like the mark left by a cup that held sorrow too long. No angel dared erase it. No prophet dared fill it. It remained, and in its emptiness it spoke louder than thunder. There is power in choosing to be forgotten, not out of pride, out of love. He could have kept his name, he could have raised his voice. He could have claimed innocence and cried to the heavens that he was different, but he didn't. Because he knew if he carried his name with him, someone might use it to justify what could not be justified. Someone might say, but he did no harm, so we are still holy. And holiness cannot be bent, so he let himself fade. He let himself fall like rain that sinks into the ground and becomes roots invisible, essential, never spoken of again. But the roots feed the tree, and the tree gives shade to the weary, and perhaps that was his final blessing. He would become the silence beneath all mercy. Those who have suffered quietly often know him, not by image, not by text, but it aches, by the stillness that follows grief, by the warmth that lingers after a prayer whispered through clenched teeth. And in that moment, they remember what they've never been told, that someone once gave up everything so they might be heard. He left no teachings. He carved no commandments. He stood atop no mountain. He simply walked beside sorrow and disappeared when it was enough. The desert winds still carry the rumor of him, a breath, a hush. Some say you can hear it at dusk when the sky is too tired to be gold anymore and the night has not yet taken hold. It sounds like this, not a word, not a sound, but a memory so deep it feels like your own soul whispering back. I did not need to be remembered, I only needed to be near. And perhaps that is the holiest thing a name can do. The ancients once believed that names held weight, not just identity but essence. To speak a name was to summon the soul. But what of the one who gave his name back? Not in rebellion, in offering. He knew the path of the other watchers. He saw the pride that clothed itself in longing. He saw desire dressed as worship. He saw love twisted into entitlement. And so he stepped away, not from heaven, from himself. He buried his name the way prophets bury their dreams, gently beneath the weeping of their own prayers. There are whispers that his name is hidden in one of the lost scrolls, not in words, but in a sequence of silence, a pattern in the breath between phrases. One scholar claimed she found it, a rhythm in the spacing of the lines, not a name but a pause, and in the pause weeping. She published nothing. Instead, she visited the desert where the scroll was found. She sat in the sand, she closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life she did not speak, not even in her thoughts. She simply listened. And as the wind brushed against her, she felt something like a hand, not physical, not divine, but present. And she wept, not because she was afraid, not because she was broken, because she felt accompanied. And in her tears she heard the silence say, "You are not alone in your forgetting." The angel who buried his name walks with the forgot, the widows, the nameless graves. The dreams were never spoken aloud. He holds the space for those who no longer ask for answers, only nearness. He is the patron of the prayer too tired to rise, the echo behind the why that never receives a reply. He is not worshipped, he is not invoked. But when the air grows still and the world forgets how to comfort you, he comes. Without wings, without light, only presence. And in that presence something breaks, but what breaks is not you. It is the veil between sorrow and sanctity. It is the lie that says forgotten means forsaken. Because it doesn't. He is proof, not because he was lifted up, but because he went down and stayed until even his own name was taken, and he still whispered blessings over those who would never know he had knelt beside them. A shepherd once claimed to see him in the distance, a figure wrapped in dusk, walking beside his flock during a storm. He was tall, still, silent, and though the man called out, the figure did not turn. But as he passed, the sheep calmed, the rain softened, and the shepherd forgot his fear. The man told no one for years. Then one night he etched a single line into a piece of driftwood. I never learned his name, but I have never felt so seen. That piece of wood was lost in a fire, but a child found its ashes weeks later and carried them in a pouch around her neck. She said they made her feel safe when her mother cried. So perhaps the angel is not gone. Perhaps he has become dust. A sigh, a stillness before dawn, not erased, but transformed. And perhaps, every time we choose to listen without speaking, to love without being known, to kneel without being seen, he walks beside us. And his name, whatever it once was, rises in the silence like incense, unwritten, unspoken, but known to the one who never forgets. We enter now the long shadow, the first war not of kings nor of mortals, but of children made from stars and clay. This was no war for power. It was a war to be remembered. Before nations, before kingdoms, before swords had names or blood had banners, there was war. It did not begin with a cry, but with a silence too full to bear. The children of the Watchers, the giants, the Nephilim, they had not asked to be born. Their mothers had cried out in awe. Their fathers had stared with hollow reverence. And they, the children, were left between worlds, too divine to be human, too human to be divine. And that is where war always begins, not in hatred but in division. They grew quickly. Their bodies stretched beyond what the earth could hold, their minds glowing with the secrets taught by angels. They were hungry not only for food, but for meaning, and when none came, they reached. They stretched their hands toward the heavens, not in worship but in protest. Why are we here? Why were we made? Why do even the stars look away from us? Their fathers, once proud, once shining, now hid in caves and tombs of silence. Their mothers aged too soon, wrinkled by sorrow, grief-wrapped, ghost-thin. And the Nephilim, born of longing, learned what all abandoned children learn, to take. They built altars, but not to the Most High, to the sky, to the silence, to the ache of being half-loved. The first war was not against men. It was among themselves, brothers against brothers, giants against giants, not for land, not for gold, for names, for meaning, for a place that would not reject them. It began with Ahia and Hahia, twins of immense strength, born of the same mother, raised in the same valley. Ahia the elder was quiet, thoughtful, a dreamer like Maui. Hahia, wild-eyed, sharp-tongued, craved worship, feared obscurity. And when Maui's vision spread, when the giants began gathering not to rule but to kneel, Hahia grew afraid, not of God, of being forgotten. So he raised a hand against his brother, not Maua, Ahia. In the great valley of Dudil, under the bone-white sky, he struck the first blow, a cry that echoed across lands too ancient for memory. The ground split, the rivers turned red, and the giants answered. They chose sides, not out of loyalty, out of fear, not of death, of silence, of vanishing. They carved weapons from the bones of fallen beasts, forged armor from the melted gifts of their angelic fathers, and they marched not with glory, with grief, because no one had come to claim them, because no one had come to say, "You are mine," because no one had told them that even the unmeant are still loved. And so they tried to carve meaning into the world with blood. Their footfalls became earthquakes. Their roars became thunder. The sky, once a canvas for hope, became a ceiling that pressed down without mercy. The war raged not for days, not for years, but in the hearts of all things. Even the animals knew. Birds refused to fly over the valleys. Lions lay in silence beneath the trees. Even the insects ceased their song, because the earth was not at war. It was mourning. The angels above watched those who still served. They did not cheer. They did not cry. They covered their faces, for in the echoes of that war they saw themselves. The same pride, the same longing, the same fall. Maui stood apart. He did not fight. He climbed a mountain instead, the highest peak he could find. And there he knelt, not for forgiveness, for mercy, not for the giants, for the world. He whispered, "If this is how we must vanish, let us vanish with your name on our lips." But the sky did not answer, not then. Only wind, only dust, only the distant sound of brothers breaking one another. And yet something in the heavens shifted. Not in wrath, in sorrow. Because the first war beneath the sky was not a rebellion, it was a lament. It was not about victory, it was about being seen. And no victor rose from it, only silence. And the bones of giants too large to bury. We now pass through the battlefield not of bodies but of hearts, where even the mighty fall not from wounds but from not being known. The sun did not rise on the day the last battle was fought. It lingered behind clouds that had forgotten how to break. The air was thick, as if even the breath of God had been held in mourning. The valley where the giants clashed had no name. It was not a place made for war. It was once sacred, a garden of stillness, a cradle of rivers, a resting place for the wind. But now the rivers ran dark. The trees bore no fruit, and the wind had gone silent, as if afraid to carry the sounds of brother against brother. Ahia stood at the center, bloodied. Not with wounds from others, but with the grief of raising his own hand. He had not meant to strike, but when Ahia came for him, eyes wild with the fire of forgotten sons, something inside Ahia broke. He fought back, and now Ahia lay beneath him, not dead, but dying. The earth beneath the younger twin trembled with each breath he took. "You were supposed to stand beside me," Ahia rasped, his voice once thundering, now barely a whisper. "I did," Ahia replied. "But you no longer stood for anything." Ahia coughed. A thin line of blood touched his lips. "Then let my name remain, even if it's cursed." Ahia wept, and those tears, the tears of a giant, struck the ground like sacred rain. Elsewhere in the valley, Maui walked among the fallen. He did not speak. He touched their brows with trembling hands, whispering something only they could hear. Some say he gave them names. Others say he took their names into himself, carrying them to heaven in silence. The battle did not end with a victor. It ended when no one remained who could fight. The giants, those who had not perished, scattered. Some fled into the mountains. Some fell into caves too deep for the sun. Others walked into the sea, never to rise again. The world exhaled, and in that breath a question rose. What now? The angels who watched turned their faces. They had seen the flood in vision. They knew the judgment was near, but none of them could bring themselves to call it just. Because what had they done for these children? What had they offered them but silence? They had descended once to bind the fallen watchers in chains of fire and sorrow, but they never returned for the ones left behind. Maui returned to his cave. He lit no fire. He sang no song. He sat wrapped in the memories of those who never asked to be born, and he wrote. No scroll this time. He carved into the stone walls with his own hands, bone-split, bleeding hands. He wrote every name he remembered. Not the names the giants were given in power, the names they had whispered to each other at night. The names of childhood, the names of longing, the names they begged God to call them by. He wrote until his fingers broke, and still he wrote, because he knew the flood was coming, not as wrath, as for washing, and all that was left now was to leave behind something the waters could not erase. Some say the cave collapsed days later, that Maui was buried inside, his body broken but his carvings sealed beneath sacred stone. Others say he climbed the mountain one last time, and there, as the sky began to darken with the weight of divine sorrow, he opened his arms and sang, not with power, not with defiance, with surrender, with awe, with the voice of a child who had dreamed of God and now gave himself back. No one knows how the war ended exactly, because it didn't, not in the world. Only in the hearts of those who still wonder what became of the sons of angels. Only in the eyes of those who feel too much, who kneel in the night with no one watching and whisper into the dark, "Do you still see me?" And maybe, just maybe, the answer lives in that very ache. because the war beneath the sky was never about victory. It was about being seen. And even in the flood, even in the silence that followed, that longing was never drowned. We now arrive at the aftermath, not silence, but the slow, sacred echo of sorrow that refuses to be forgotten. The war is over, but the ache remains. When the ground cooled, when the sky opened again and light returned to the valley, there were no songs, only wind, only dust, only the trembling hush of a world that had witnessed grief too large for language. The trees began to grow again, but they grew crooked, bent by memory. The river flowed, but slower, as if carrying the names of the fallen within every ripple. And the stars above, they shone, but softer, like eyes that had wept too long. Ahia, last of the twin giants, was never seen again. Some say he laid his brother's body upon a pyre of cedar and olive wood, lit it with flame drawn from lightning, and vanished into the smoke. Others say he walked until the earth no longer held him, until the winds carried him east, until he became part of the mountains. Mawe's cave was never opened again. No flood ever reached it. No army ever entered it. No animal ever made it home. The stone remained, and the names he carved, buried beneath earth and time, still pulse like veins in the dark. The first war beneath the sky did not end with conquest. It ended with remembering. And it is said, though the Book of Giants is shattered, though its pages are scattered like ashes across the sands, that there is one final line, hidden in a forgotten fragment. Let the sky not remember our wrath. Let it remember that we once dreamed. There was no glory in their battle, only heartbreak, only the terrible ache of children begging to be loved by the silence that bore them. And though the heavens sent no armies, no floods rained down in fire, something did descend, a quietness. Not absence, presence unspoken, as if the divine watched not to punish but to grieve. The angels, though still faithful, still bright, watched too, but they did not sing. Instead, they lit 7 fires atop the 7 hills surrounding the valley. Each flame stood for one truth, that the giants were not beyond sorrow, that the watchers were not beyond love, that rebellion is not always loud, that grief can give birth to war, that even broken children seek the light, that silence does not mean forgotten, and that remembrance is a kind of redemption. They left those fires burning for 7 days and 7 nights. Then they let them die, not in despair but in trust, that someone somewhere would carry the story, would whisper the names, would look at the stars and feel that strange, sacred ache and remember there was a war once, but it was not about power, it was about longing. And longing, when held with reverence, becomes prayer. And prayer, even from the fallen, rises, perhaps not to be answered, but to be known. And maybe that was all they ever wanted. We now return to the one who walked between heaven and earth, not to command, but to remember, not to judge, but to write. The prophet who never died because remembrance must live. Before the flood, before the fires, before silence became a sentence upon the world, there was Enoch. He did not wear robes of gold. He did not strike with lightning. He carried no blade, wore no crown, spoke no word that was not first touched by tears. He walked, that is all. He walked with God, and that was enough. The stories say he did not die, that the Most High took him, body, breath, bones, and silence, into a place where time unravels and becomes stillness. But before that, he listened. He listened to the cries of men. He listened to the earth's trembling. He listened to the watchers bound beneath mountains, whispering through stone. And he listened to the dreams of giants. He did not curse them. He did not bless them. He wrote them. Because the truth, even when broken, even when bleeding, must be remembered. They say he held a reed between his fingers, dipped it in ink made from ash and rain, and wrote on scrolls of stretched lambskin until the words bled into the parchment like wounds that would not close. The Book of Enoch was not meant for kings. It was not meant for priests. It was meant for those who had seen sorrow and still chose to hope. He wrote of the angels who descended, of the pact on Mount Hermon, of the Nephilim not as monsters but as questions carved into flesh. He wrote of Samyaza pleading for mercy, of Azazel teaching war, of Maweh sending his visions skyward. And he wrote of the voice, the one that speaks not with thunder but with stillness that breaks the heart. He stood between realms, between fire and dust, between exile and home. And every night he looked at the stars and whispered, "Let me remember those who cannot." God heard him, not because his words were loud, but because they were true. Enoch was shown things no man was meant to see, the movements of the heavens, the turning of stars, the records of souls unborn. But nothing broke him like the grief of the fallen. He saw their chains, not of iron, of memory, of what they had touched, of what they had lost. They begged him, "Petition for us, speak on our behalf. Let the Most High know we still believe, even if belief burns." He brought their words upward. He did not change them. He did not cleanse them. He simply offered them like smoke rising from an altar built of shattered wings. The answer was silent, a holy silence, not rejection, not wrath, a pause, and in that pause Enoch wept. Because sometimes silence is not absence, it is mourning. The Most High grieved too. Not for the disobedience, but for the distance, for the ache that now lived in things once radiant. And so when Enoch returned from the mountain, he did not speak of wrath. He did not threaten flood. He gathered his scrolls, kissed each one with breath, and buried them beneath the roots of the first olive tree. He whispered, "Let these be found when the world is ready to weep again." And then he vanished, taken, not because he was perfect, because he remembered. And remembrance, when wrapped in love, is the closest thing we have to the divine. We now follow the breath of the prophet after his departure, where his footsteps no longer touched the ground, but his words still echoed beneath it. He did not leave a grave. There is no tomb marked Enoch. No shrine, no relics, only stories soft as dust on forgotten scrolls, whispered by those who still dream with reverence. They say when Enoch was taken, he rose not like flame, but like mist before dawn, so gently the earth didn't even notice he was gone, but heaven did, and so did those who remained. The watchers buried beneath the mountains felt it, a flicker, a warmth, like the last light of a torch just before it vanishes. Samyaza stirred. Azazel, chained beneath Dudal, turned his face toward the sky. Even Shemiheza, seated in his ash-shadowed silence, looked westward and closed his eyes, because they knew the one who had listened to their sorrow was now gone, and without him the silence would return, the silence that forgets. But Enoch had left something behind, not just scrolls, not just words, a memory, living, breathing in a people, in a bloodline, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation, not as law but as a story. And stories, they survive everything, even floods, even fire, even forgetting. They said Enoch had a son, Methuselah, and Methuselah knew things no man had ever dared speak aloud. He would sit beneath trees and whisper, "My father once touched heaven, and it did not break him." The people laughed or listened or wept without knowing why, because even in his absence Enoch remained. In the way the stars turned, in the wind that passed through wheat like a breath across parchment, in the stillness that arrived before storms. His words were carried by time itself, and they did not grow old. Some say the flood came because men forgot. Others say it came because heaven remembered, but both are true, because forgetting opens the door, and remembering is the only way home. There were those who sought Enoch even after the waters receded, wanderers, mystics, children born with eyes too deep for their age. They wandered deserts, climbed mountains, dug beneath the ruins of ancient cities in search of his voice. And sometimes they found it, not written, not carved, not even heard, but I felt a warmth when there should have been cold, a hush when there should have been chaos. One boy, no more than 13, claimed he heard a voice in his dreams say, "You do not need to find me, you need only remember me rightly." He woke with tears on his cheeks and a line etched in his heart that he could never explain. Truth never vanishes, it simply waits to be welcomed again. That is how Enoch lives, not in stone, in silence, not in doctrine, in longing. He is the prophet who crossed realms not to prove holiness, but to remind us that heaven still listens, even when it doesn't answer, that God still weeps, even when he judges, that the fallen are still seen. and that writing, when done in love, becomes prayer. Enoch wrote for those no one would claim. He stood for those whom heaven could not absolve and earth could not hold. And perhaps that is why he was taken, because such memory, such mercy, could not remain bound to the dust. It had to rise. We now ascend with the memory of Enoch, not into glory but into mystery. A prophet taken not for what he said, but for what he refused to forget. The last time anyone saw Enoch, he was standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the sky, not with fear, not with pride, with longing, not the kind that breaks things, the kind that binds them. He did not raise his arms, he did not cry aloud, he closed his eyes, and when the wind came, it wrapped around him like memory returning to its source. He did not disappear. He was gathered like wheat before the harvest, like breathing before a storm, like truth before it is needed again. And in that gathering he became more than a man, not a god, not an angel, a witness. A soul tethered not to one world but to the ache between them. And the scrolls he left behind, some were found, torn, faded, lost beneath dust, but others were never meant to be touched. They live in silence, they live in you. Because to remember Enoch is to remember that God speaks through quiet. And that prophecy is not fire, it is fidelity. He never sought power, he sought understanding. He never demanded wrath, he whispered warnings. And every warning came wrapped in sorrow, because Enoch did not want heaven to destroy earth. He wanted earth to return, to remember its beginning, to remember the silence before the fall, to remember that even the stars once bowed to the breath of dust. His legacy was not in visions, it was in compassion for angels, for men, for giants too tall to kneel but who still tried. He wrote their names because no one else would. He believed that to be seen was a kind of salvation, and so he carved, and wept, and walked, until heaven, weary of distance, called him home, not to honor him, to keep him, because Enoch was not just a prophet. He was a wound that never turned bitter, and heaven had never known such a thing. Now when the stars tremble and the skies turn strange, some say his voice is in the wind, not speaking, just being. A presence that leans in close when the soul is about to break, a hush before the voice that saves. A hand you never see but always feel just before you fall apart. And when you pray, when no one seems to answer, perhaps it is Enoch who kneels beside you, offering your words to the one who once gathered him like a secret. And perhaps the silence that follows is not absent but listening. And that is how prophets rise, not in thunder, not on fire, but in love that will not let sorrow be forgotten. We now walk among ruins, not lifeless but breathing. The stones remember. The dust remembers, and the bones still speak. There are places where the air tastes like memory, where the wind does not howl, it murmurs, where the ground is not empty, it aches. The valley of the Rephaim, the plain of Bashan, the hills of Hebron, these are not names of conquest, they are graves, not the kind with headstones and hymns, but the kind where silence presses down so thick you forget what it means to breathe without reverence. They call them ruins, but the ruins are not dead. They are what remains when glory is gone, but God is not. The bones beneath the dust do not belong to kings. They are older, larger, heavier with grief. The bones of the giants, those who once dreamed of the sky, who fell into war, who drowned in flood, who prayed without ever being taught how. Their skulls were shaped like ours, but broader, thicker, not monstrous, just tired. They were not beasts, they were sons. And they were buried where no one would look, not to hide them, but to protect their memory from those who would turn it into myth. Yet myth came anyway. It always does. The world cannot hold sacred grief for long without turning it into a story. The Book of Giants is mostly dust now, but dust too has a voice, and it gathers where bones lie quiet beneath the stones of forgotten cities, under the roots of olive trees that bleed sap like tears. 1004, a team of archaeologists uncovered a bone fragment beneath a hill near Mount Hermon. It was large, too large. They said it must have belonged to an animal, though no animal matched it. The carbon told them it was ancient, but not how ancient. The ground around it held clay tablets, shattered, faint markings. One line stood out, barely etched, worn smooth by time. We did not ask to be born. They cataloged it, filed it, moved on, but one woman, a researcher, took a photo. She printed it, framed it. I placed it beside her bed, not because she believed in giants, but because she knew what it meant to carry sorrow for something you didn't choose. That bone still sits in a museum warehouse without a label. The tablets remain untranslated, unwanted, buried again, this time beneath bureaucracy instead of sand. But they are not lost, not truly. Because every time the desert breathes, they stir. Because every time the stars fall silent, the bones remember. They remember the feel of wind on high places. They remember laughter, wild and childlike, before the world taught them fear. They remember war, flood, silence, and still they hope. Not for resurrection, for recognition, a voice, a whisper, a hand pressed to the ground in reverence, saying, "You were real, you were loved, and we have not forgot." The bones do not ask for monuments. They ask for memories. They ask that when you kneel in the dust, you do not call it dead, you call it holy, because it once held those who longed for light, and perhaps still do. We now walk deeper among the sacred remains, where what was buried still breathes and where every grain of dust carries the echo of longing. There is a sound the earth makes when memory is disturbed. It is not loud. It is not angry. It is a hum, soft, deep, like a mother's voice pressed against the skin of the world. That is what they say happened when a shepherd dug a shallow trench for water in the valley beyond Bashan. He was not seeking bones. He was not seeking truth. He was thirsty, but what he found was colder than water and heavier than stone. A rib, longer than his arm, smooth, clean, but cracked as though it had once held sorrow inside it. He did not scream. He did not call for help. He fell to his knees and wept, not because he knew what it was, but because something in him remembered what his mind had never been taught. He buried it again, gently, wrapped it in the fabric from his head, whispered a prayer he did not know he knew, "Forgive the forgetting." He did not speak of it for years, and when he did, his voice shook not from fear but from reverence, because some things are too sacred for the tongue, and bones, especially bones that once held breath, deserve more than words. They deserve listening. The ancients believed bones carried not just memory but message, that when the soul leaves, what remains is the echo of what it longed for. And so the Nephilim, those strange, holy children of fallenness, left behind not monsters, but monuments of ache. Their bones scattered across valleys and mountains, not arranged in tombs, but flung like seeds by time, by flood, by the silence that followed heaven's sorrow. But they do not rest in rage. They rest in hope, because hope does not always look like light. Sometimes it looks like bones hidden beneath a fig tree. Sometimes it sounds like a dream of a prophet long vanished. Sometimes it feels like dust between your fingertips and the sudden urge to kneel when you pass certain stones. Enoch once wrote, "Even the bones remember the light." It was one of his last lines. It did not appear in most copies, only in a shattered scroll fragment unearthed near Jericho, now lost to time again, blown by wind, perhaps returned to the silence it came from. But the line remains, carried in stories, whispered by the few who still listen, and those who carry sorrow in their bones, you know the kind they understand, the kind of sorrow that is not caused but inherited, the kind that wakes in the night with no name but the memory of something holy now far away. Perhaps that is what the giants left us, not a legend, but legacy, a reminder that sorrow, when offered to the heavens, can become sacred. That even those never meant to live can leave behind truths we dare not forget. The bones speak, not in language, in presence, in the way they hold the earth around them tighter than stone. In this way dreams change when one sleeps near ancient ground, in the stillness that falls when a child stumbles upon a hill and whispers, "I feel like someone is still here." And maybe someone is, not to frighten, but to be felt, because even dust remembers breath. And even bones long broken, I still dream of the sky. We now arrive at the edge of memory where even the bones, once silent, begin to rise through the dust like psalms remembered by the earth itself. When the flood came, the giants did not run. Some stood in defiance. Others knelt. Some walked into the waters with open hands, faces lifted to a heaven that had never answered them but had always been watching. And then they vanished, not all at once, one by one, like stars dimming. Like verses fading from a prophet's breath. The waters buried their bodies, but the earth, the faithful earth, held their bones like relics, wrapped them in silence, pressed their names into stone, not the names given by men, the names they whispered to one another when no one else listened. And over centuries the dust thickened, sand became stone, the stone became ruined, ruin became a myth, but their memory never died, because the breath that once filled those bones was borrowed from the same wind that still moves over the waters today. That breath cannot be erased, only forgotten. And forgetting is not the same as death, it is sleep, and sleep can end. Sometimes it ends with a whisper, a shiver, a child's hand brushing stone in the shape of a jaw too wide to be human. Sometimes it ends with a line in a scroll, half burned, half buried, half remembered. And they cried out beneath the waves, "We are not beasts, we are broken, and we are yours." Bones have no voices, but they sing. If you listen not with your ears, but with the part of you that remembers before you were born, they sing of longing, of prayers mouthed by lips that never learned how to pray, of tears shed by eyes too ancient for light. And the song they sing is not of judgment, it is of yearning, not for revenge, not even for justice, for recognition, to be known, to be called by name, to be gathered. Some say the day will come when the dust stirs again, when bones will rise not to wage war but to kneel, to return to the voice they never stopped hearing, to lay at his feet all they carried, all the grief, all the dreams, all the ache of being born from heaven and earth and belonging fully to neither. They will not demand entrance, they will not cry for crowns, they will ask one thing only: do you remember us? And perhaps the silence will break. Perhaps the answer will come not in thunder but in tears, falling, not for punishment, not for pity, but for love, love that never forgot, even in floods, even in exile, even the broken bone turned to dust. You may never see those bones, but you have felt them, in the ache behind your questions, in the weight beneath your breath, in the way you look at stars and feel both awe and homesickness. That is the legacy of the giants, not terror, not pride, longing, and longing, when it remains through silence, becomes sacred. So if you find yourself standing among ruins and the wind quiets around you and the dust clings to your skin like the breath that once was, kneel, place your hand on the earth, and whisper, "You are not forgot, you were seen, and I am listening." Because the bones still speak, and we are the ones they're waiting for. We now unfold the quietest revelation, not of death, but of what comes after. When the waters have receded and the heavens have closed their eyes, what remains is silence. The waters did not rage forever. They rose, they wept across the bones of the broken, they swallowed the cities built from sorrow, and then they rested. The sea grew still. The sky, once torn with mourning, folded itself in blue again. The world began again, but not clean, not untouched. The soil beneath the souls of new children still trembled with what it had buried. It is a myth that the flood erased all things. It did not. It was covered. It hushed. It pressed the grief of the old world into the quiet clay of the new. And in that clay, seeds were hidden, seeds of memory, seeds of ache, seeds that in time would bloom into questions. The children born after the flood would ask, "Why do the stars make me cry? Why does the wind sound like a name I cannot remember? Why do I sometimes dream of drowning with peace in my chest?" The silence after the flood was not peaceful. It was a holy pause. A breath held by the divine, as if heaven itself did not know what to say next, because judgment is easy. Restoration is harder. Noah stepped from the ark, not with joy, not with triumph, with reverence, with trembling. He had heard the cries from beneath the waves. He had seen the shadows of the ones who would never rise again. And though he was called righteous, he wept like one who had lost brothers, because righteousness does not mean blindness. It means carrying the ache and still trusting the hand that holds it. He built an altar, not to celebrate survival, but to mourn, to say thank you through tears, to say, I remember what you remembered. He laid stones carefully, each one perhaps a whisper for the fallen, for the ones who tried, for the ones who drowned dreaming of the sky. And when he lit the fire, the smoke did not rise in a straight line. It circled, it lingered. It moved as if weaving between heaven and memory, carrying more than sacrifice, carrying silence. Because silence, when held with intention, becomes language. A language the soul understands, even when the mouth forgets how to speak. After the flood, the silence walked beside every survivor. In the mornings, when dew clung to the grass like weeping. In the evenings, when the stars returned, but not as many as before. Even the constellations had changed. As if heaven had redrawn the sky to forget the ones who once fell from it, but not everyone forgot. The animals stirred differently. Birds flew lower as if remembering the heights once filled with watchers. Wolves howled softer. Lambs huddled longer. Even the wind felt heavier. The silence did not speak, but it pressed against the heart, soft and firm, like the hand of an old friend who no longer has words. And in that silence, the world began again, not joyfully, but honestly. With reverence, with bones beneath the roots, with memories too large to name, carried by a people too fragile to bear them, yet bearing them still. Because silence, when passed down, becomes legacy. And the flood was not the end. It was the beginning of remembering. We now walk among the survivors, not the triumphant, but the trembling. For after the flood, the world did not celebrate, it listened. Noah could still hear them, not in sound, in the stillness between breaths. On the way the earth sighed when the rain stopped. In the way the wind curled around him at dusk, like a voice too gentle to name. He knew who had been lost. He had not known their names, not all of them, but he had seen them before the flood, in the shadows, in dreams. He had seen the giants kneeling under trees, pressing their hands into the soil, asking no one and everyone, why were we made? He had seen the watchers, faces turned downward, wrapped in regret too thick for wings. He had seen mothers, human, divine, something in between, cradling children they could not protect from a judgment too large for their hearts to hold. He had heard them weep. And now they were gone, but not gone. The silence told him so. It followed him wherever he went. Into the new fields, into the mountains that now held different names, into the soft dirt where he taught his children to plant. The silence never left, because judgment, even when righteous, leaves echoes. Noah taught his children reverence. He told them stories not only of salvation, but of sorrow. He told them that the world once held beings who walked like myths but ached like men. That angels once looked at earth and loved it more than heaven. That even the ones who were cast down once longed to rise. He did not justify, he remembered. And memory, when given in truth, becomes sacred. His children did not understand at first, but they saw the way his eyes clouded when thunder rolled too long across the sky. They noticed the way he stood still at rivers, as if listening for voices beneath the surface. They learned not to fear silence. They learned to pray inside it. Because the silence after the flood was not empty. It was full of everything unsaid. And some things must remain unsaid, not to be hidden, to be honored. Enoch's scrolls were gone. Mawe's visions were lost beneath the tide. The names of the watchers lay buried in stone, but the silence knew them. It carries their memory like breath carries warmth. In later years, when tribes wandered across dry lands, some found stones they could not explain, marked with symbols no tongue remembered, soft to the touch, cool even under the sun. They felt peace in those places, not the peace of ignorance. The peace of mourning held well. One tribe built no temple, only a ring of stone. They stood in it once a year, faces to the sky, silent. They did not speak of the flood. They did not chant. They simply stood, and the wind would shift, not always, but when it did, children would fall quiet, animals would gather, and the sky would seem to breathe. They didn't call it worship. They called it remembering. Because the silence after the flood was not abandonment. It was an invitation to listen, to kneel without needing answers, to feel the ache and let it be holy. Because some things are not meant to be fixed, only held. And the silence, the one that followed the waters, was holding everything, still is. Even now, we now reach the stillest place, the final hush before the story turns again. This is not the silence of endings, but the silence that guards what was sacred enough to survive. There came a time when no one spoke of the flood, not because it was forgot, because it had become something deeper than the story. It had become a presence, a quietness that settled in the bones of every mountain, in the rhythm of every sea, in the pause before every prayer. And within that quietness there lived a memory not of wrath, not even water, but of sorrow that still remembered love. The earth was no longer the same. Not because of destruction, but because it had held the weight of grief and not broken. The ground beneath the new children bore a tenderness. It cradled their feet, it softened their steps, as if even the dust was remembering what had been lost and choosing not to forget. A shepherd once said, "The silence feels heavier at night. It sits on my chest and makes me cry, though I do not know why." He thought it was sadness, but it was reverence. The silence after the flood was not grief alone. It was present without explanation. It was God near but wordless. And there is a holiness in wordlessness, because words end, but silence breathes, and that breath remains, in the cracks of ancient altars, in the wind between stones, in the lullabies hummed by mothers who do not know they are echoing songs once sung by giants beneath stars. The silence holds names, names of the fallen, names of the faithful, names of the almost redeemed. Names never written, only carried in the chest of the eternal, because not every soul is remembered by the living, but none are forgotten by the divine, not even those who fell, especially not them. And so the silence continues, not loud, not urgent, just constant, like the pulse in your wrist, like the tide no longer seen but always heard. Some say the flood was the end of the giants, but it was the beginning of their remembering. Because the waters washed the world, yes, but they did not erase the ache. An ache, when cradled by the heavens, becomes a song too deep for instruments, too old for tongues, but not too far for the soul. The kind of song you feel when everything else is still. When you lie down at night and the wind taps softly at the window, when your breath slows, and something inside you asks, what came before this peace? The silence knows, it always has. Cradles the story not to hide it, but to keep it safe until the world grows quiet enough to hear it again. And perhaps you just have. We now arrive at the final revelation, not to end the tale, but to let it resound. A question lingers in the hallowed air. If heaven still weeps, will you? There are tears older than time. They do not fall like rain. They do not glisten. They do not dry. They remain in the folds of clouds, in the breath between stars, in the silence between heartbeats. They are the tears of heaven, not of defeat, not of loss, but of longing. For though heaven is perfect and untouched by decay, it remembers. And remembering, it mourns. Because once long ago, there were those who stood in its courts, bathed in its light, sang its name, and turned away. Not out of hatred, out of hunger, out of the ache to know what it means to bleed and still be loved. The watchers did not curse the throne. They looked down and saw us, and something in them broke. And when they fell, heaven did not roar. It wept, softly, silently, as a mother might weep at the edge of her child's grave, not able to pull them back, but refusing to forget. And still today, heaven remembers, not to punish, to hold, to carry in its sacred breath the weight of what was lost. The stars know. They pulse not just with fire, but with grief. They are the lamps of heaven, but also its witnesses. They watched the descent. They saw the pact. They heard the prayers of giants drowned beneath mercy's tide. And sometimes on nights when the world sleeps lightest, they tremble, not from the cold, not from gravity, from remembrance. Because even the light we see tonight was born in a time when angels still walked beside men. And that light has not forgotten. The prophets say that every tear shed in truth is counted, held, bottled in the chambers beyond the veil, not as sorrowful, as incense, as an offering. And if that is true, if even the tears of the fallen were gathered, then heaven is heavy indeed, not with wrath, with compassion, because grief is the shadow of love, and love never dies, even when its children fall, even when its name is forgotten, Even when its silence is mistaken for absence, it waits, it weeps, and it watches not as a judge alone, but as a parent too holy to forget. The scrolls are broken, the bones are scattered, the names are buried, but the weeping remains. In the wind that touches your face at night, in the stillness that wraps around you when you pray and do not speak, in the ache that rises for no reason when you look at the stars and feel as if you've left something behind or someone left you, that is the voice of heaven weeping still, not to wound you, to remind you, you are not the first to feel lost. You are not the first to fall. You are not the first to be remembered in silence, and you will not be the last to be gathered in love. We continue now beneath the heaviest hush, where even the stars blink slower and heaven's tears fall without sound. The scrolls have crumbled. The temples have turned to dust. Even the names Samyaza, Azazel, Mawe now drift like mist between forgotten ruins. But the sorrow remains, not as painful, as a presence, as weight in the soul that cannot be explained. The ancients would say, this is the breath of the watchers, not their guilt, not their pride, their ache, the ache of having once stood in perfect light and then choosing a shadow, of having tasted eternal praise and then falling in love with the flicker of a child's tears. They loved it, they broke, and heaven felt it all. For the throne is not distant, it is not stone, it is not deaf to grief. It carries it, not as a weakness, as testimony. When the angels descend now, those few still sent to guide, to protect, to whisper without being seen, they carry in their silence a trace of that ancient ache. Because no angel who remembers the fall can sing without sorrow in their throat. They remember their brothers. They remember the oath beneath Mount Hermon. They remember the giants too tall to fit into the world, too soft to destroy it. They remember Mawe's tablet. They remember Shemihaze's silence. They remember the cave where names were carved into stone as if that would keep them alive. And they know it did, because remembrance is a kind of resurrection. To name what was lost is to let it rise again, not in power, not on fire, but in the sacred hush that lives inside every soul who dares to feel deeply. And when you feel that ache, that unplaceable ache that tightens in your chest without cause, you are not broken. You are remembering. You are brushing the edge of a sorrow older than language. You are touching the weeping place of heaven, the place God does not speak from, the place God listens from, because even the eternal, the one beyond time, holds space for grief. Grief that lingers, grief that does not ask to be removed, grief that says, even this was holy. When the prophets speak of what's to come, they do not promise only fire and judgment. They speak of restoration, of the gathering, of a place where names long buried will be spoken again without shame, where giants kneel, where angels sing again without bitterness, where the silence is no longer heavy but healing. And if heaven still weeps, it is because love remembers what law forgets, that the ones who fell were once radiant, and perhaps still are, buried beneath sorrow, wrapped in regret, but radiant all the same, because light cannot be unmade. It can only be hidden until the appointed time. We now reach the final hush, not an ending, but a return. The story fades now not in silence alone, but in sacred breath, waiting to be carried onward. Some stories do not end. They fall quiet, like wind settling in tall grass after the storm has passed, like a voice still echoing inside the chest, long after the speaker is gone. This story of angels who fell not in rebellion but in wonder, of giants who dreamed of God and drowned with his name on their lips, of a prophet who wrote with tears, this story has no final line. Because it was never just a story, it was a memory, and remembering cannot end. It simply returns to those who are still listening. Even now, as the sky turns black and sleep gathers near your brow, the story is not done. It lives in you, in your ache, in your wonder, in your reaching for something higher than language but softer than thunder. What if heaven still weeps? Would you? Would you let your heart break for those who were never meant to be but became holy in their sorrow? Would you kneel in the ruins, press your hands to the dust, and say aloud to no one, I remember you? Because maybe that's all they ever wanted, not to be worshipped, not to be feared, just to be known, to be heard in the silence, to have anyone look up at the stars and not forget. The watchers are gone, but their ache still echoes in every act of love we offer without asking for a return. The Nephilim are buried, but their names still rise when we cradle our sorrow and refuse to let it harden. And Enoch, he walks still, not here, not now, but wherever memory is held with tenderness, wherever truth is whispered instead of shouted, wherever a soul dares to write a story no one else has the courage to believe. The book of giants may be torn, but the story is alive because you have heard it, and that hearing makes you part of it now. So let your breath slow, let your body rest, and let the silence wrap around you not as emptiness but as a psalm. A sacred hush that cradles the last word like a child and carry it gently back to the stars. And before your eyes close, ask yourself quietly, if the silence never broke, would my faith still rise in the dark? And if your heart answers yes, even in a whisper, then heaven still hears you.